It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Gary Cohen, CEO of Qualitor Automotive. Qualitor is a leading diversified supplier of aftermarket safety and wear parts for the automotive industry. Prior to Qualitor, Gary was president and CEO of Timex Group, a global manufacturer of watches, where he made significant improvements in expanding revenues of key product lines. Prior to joining Timex, Gary had several senior-level executive positions at Playtex, Procter & Gamble, and the Gillette Company, each increasing in scale, scope of responsibility, and complexity. Gary and his wife Carolyn have 4 daughters and reside in Westport, Connecticut. Gary Cohen, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. Nice to be on.
Great to have you here. And we always kind of like to get started at the beginning. You've had a wonderful career and lots of corner office experience, and I'm sure our guests are looking forward to hearing about that. But let's start in the early days. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the immediate suburbs of Boston, a fairly blue-collar town, modest means growing up. I'm a product of public schools. I'm the oldest of 3 kids, and interestingly, my mom still lives in the house that I was born in.
No kidding. Gosh, great. Yeah. Both mom and dad worked, or mom worked from the home?
Mom worked from the home until high school, and I actually worked in her office during high school. My dad worked the entire time. My dad actually was a Navy pilot at the end of the Korean War.
Cool.
And he was very analytical and very focused on data. Pilots back in the day used slide rules. They didn't have a lot of automatic equipment, and so I got a lot of my data focused and analytical, framework from him.
Did mom and dad go to college?
Mom did not, and dad went to college before he went into the Navy right at the end of the Korean War.
Right. So when you were growing up, was he still a vet and in active service, or did he get into business after his naval career?
No, he got into business after his naval career. In fact, he was a statistician and worked on many startup companies in the 70s. Back then, Route 128 in Boston was the precursor to Silicon Valley.
Right,
so he worked
with a lot of digital equipment was a big one out.
And he worked with a lot of small high-tech companies, many of them supporting the aeronautics industry. And, probably the major impact on my career from that is he was laid off several times because he worked for a lot of these small high-flyer companies.
Right.
And then after probably getting laid off the 3rd time and having to support a family of 3 kids, he decided to pivot and go into a much more larger company role with Blue Cross Blue Shield as an actuary. So, his focus to me was always like, get a stable job, work for a large company. And naturally, I did just the opposite when I graduated college. But, it definitely had an impact on me.
What other kind of early lessons did mom and dad share with you growing up?
Family values were really important to us. I was fortunate that I had 4 grandparents, 2 great-grandmothers. They all lived in the same street. So we were definitely a throwback, to the old days. But I learned a lot about family values. Every Sunday we had to visit both sets of grandparents. So that was instilled in me in an early time.
Yeah. what kind of your early influences other than, hard work and family values?
My father, because he was so focused on statistics and analytics, I would
Yeah.
always, I became a good math person because of that. But whenever I asked my dad for help on math homework, uh, he was just so analytical focused. He had to go back to the Pythagorean theorem to explain every homework assignment. And so, nowadays when I'm sitting in a presentation and somebody shows me a lot of data, while I'm hungry for it, I can't stand if somebody shows me a spreadsheet that has way too much data. I always think back to my time when
Right.
my father just overwhelmed me with, too much information. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can definitely, throw people off because while I'm data focused, I really would much prefer to just get key messages and highlights from the
Got
data.
it. Makes good sense. Were you a good student in school, Gary?
I was okay. I was a B
Yeah.
plus student. I think
Yeah.
most of my early days were focused on hard work and sweat equity and
Yep.
perseverance more than anything else.
And what about outside activities? Sports, music, theater, debate? What kind of things do you participate in?
I love sports. I was a soccer captain in high school, yearbook editor. I was involved in a lot of
Cool.
clubs, and for me, it was all about being involved.
Yeah.
That's really where I got a lot of my energy.
More of a social standpoint, is that kind of or social perspective? Is that what you?
I've always thrived on building a network, and we can talk
Right.
about that later in the conversation. But I think
Yeah.
early days it was really just about making solid friendships and being a part of the community. I did work back in high school, and I actually bought my first stereo in ninth grade from all the money that I made from working. So
Cool.
early on, I always had this relationship with working, having money in the bank, and trying to figure out a way to spend it and save it at the same time.
Do you have one of those savings accounts where every time you would go in, they'd print it out and they'd show the interest grow and so forth?
Yeah, I did. In fact, I explained
We're
that to my
dating
kids.
ourselves, right? We're dating ourselves, Gary.
Yeah, the passport, the green,
The
and I used
passport, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It
I
was a
explained it to my
motivator, wasn't it?
yeah, and I explained it to my kids, and they just have no idea what I'm talking
What? What are
about.
you talking about? Yeah, but you didn't
Yeah.
have online then?
Well, first of all,
What?
interest rates were a little higher then. I
Well,
think we're
that's
getting
true.
back to those days, but like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
last 10 years, like you don't get interest on any money. So even trying to
Right.
explain that to a kid is a foreign language.
Exactly. So you mentioned you had a lot of jobs. What any entrepreneurial things you did as a kid? Did you start with a paper route and sell Christmas cards at Christmas time or other types of stuff, or did you go more for retail minimum wage types of jobs?
Actually, my first job in high school was an office job working in my mom's office back in the day when you used to have to put cards into computers to get them to read out.
Sure.
So I used to sort these cards and IBM mini computers. And in some weird way, I made money, but that actually led to my first job out of college. I was always just focused on making money, but just being in the right place at the right time didn't hurt either.
Well, it sounds like you were a good saver, but you had to have some vices in high school. What did you spend your money on?
As I said, audio equipment and
Audio.
record albums.
Yeah, yeah. Good music collection. What was your favorite music back then?
I had a pretty eclectic taste, so it ranged from the Eagles to Bruce Springsteen to even a lot to Earth, Wind and Fire. So
Yeah.
to
Cool.
me, I had a pretty broad range of tastes, and just whenever there was an album that came out that I liked, I went and bought it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you went on to Brandeis University, right? Did your undergrad. Tell us about the choice in going there. Was that kind of a natural selection for you? Did you take a look at a broad range? I know you ended up studying economics.
Brandeis was pretty close to home. They
Yeah.
had an amazing soccer program. They had just won the
Ah,
national championship in Division Three.
okay.
So I was recruited by the coach, and
Oh,
when I
awesome.
showed up, it
Great.
just became a natural fit for me. I never wound up breaking the starting lineup. I mean, the team was amazing, but
Yeah.
it did break into a whole new network for me. So I always had the social network of the sports teams, plus a lot of friends that I made through other channels. And to this day, I maintain a lot of those friendships.
Did you play soccer all the way through high school? Was that your varsity sport, so to speak?
Yeah, that was my varsity sport. I also ran track, but soccer was definitely my
Yeah.
passion. And I wound up playing, interestingly, even after college with a lot of the guys that I met through college and through the network that I had in the Boston area.
Cool. How'd you pick economics? Did you kind of have that business inkling and decide that's the way you wanted to go? Or, was there something that fascinated you back to the days of your dad sharing, slide rule presentations? So.
Well, because I had two grandmothers and two great grandmothers, where I grew up, it was expected that I was going to be a doctor as the oldest child. And, when I went into Brandeis, I realized that really probably wasn't going to be in the cards. I definitely gravitated towards economics more just because of the interest. But I have to say my favorite classes were the ones where there were, where I had to take requirements in other areas. So as much as economics influenced where I went to business school and my future career, the classes in art history, theater, blues, the history of the 50s and 60s had as much of a impact on me as anything else. And I'm still a history buff to this day because of some of the courses that I took in college.
What was that first job you took coming out of Brandeis?
Well, back in the early 80s when I was looking for a job, the economy wasn't that robust. And so I did a lot of networking. And interestingly, my first job was for a startup software company. The folks that actually worked in my mom's office in high school were IBM salespeople, and they went and started their own company, selling purchasing software for IBM computers. And so I networked my way in to get a job. They put me through programming school for the first 3 months, and I quickly realized that I loved the company, but I was not going to be a programmer.
Not enough social time there, I think, Gary. Right?
No, and I knew what I was good at, and I knew what I wasn't good at. But I loved the software and had an affinity for explaining how it worked to people. So I pivoted my way from being a programmer to being a customer service person. So I was actually the first customer service person and started an entire group within my first 6 months of working there.
For that same organization. Cool.
For that same organization. And I did that for 3 years before I went to business school. So I had a team of people for me, right out of college. And I got to give the folks that were running the company a lot of credit for, both giving faith in me, but also just, giving me the training that I needed to learn how to navigate in a fast, moving startup company.
And those folks that you were leading, were they about the same age? Were they older, younger? What was it? Was it a mix?
It was a mix. I mean, it was a combination of newly minted college grads because the goal of the company then was to get liberal arts folks and train them to how to talk to customers and how to be programmers. But then we had a lot of programmers that were 5-10 years my senior. And so having a customer service group where people, were several years older than me was quite a challenge. So, even back then I had to learn, more through influence and, being nice to people than, I could just by telling people what to do.
What were some of those leadership challenges? And if you don't mind sharing, maybe some of the mistakes you made in those early days.
Yeah, I mean, I think the leadership challenges are, I was not a domain expertise in software programming, but a lot of folks that I had to work with were. So for me, it was as much earning respect than anything else. And I learned early days that, I had to gain their respect. I had to have them have a voice because they knew a lot more than I did about software and programming. Probably the biggest challenge I had was I actually had an Israeli Navy pilot working in our group who was very direct, and how to get him to be much more part of the team and to ask questions versus just be direct because of his culture. So well before it was even in vogue in terms of being inclusive and learning how to take different cultures and integrating them. When later days in Gillette, I mean, that was just part of being a global company, but I had experience of it right out of college.
Awesome. How did you mentioned earlier about, the necessity of leading folks that were, the subject matter experts when you weren't, and what kind of skills did you use? How did you earn that respect?
Part of it is just being authentic and treating people the way they want to be treated, and also, giving them the respect for their knowledge base, but then, working together to figure out how everybody can contribute to get to a common goal. That, my later days in brand management were all about that. But as you know, you're the conductor of the orchestra, but you're not playing and so to be that conductor and get everybody to organize, and a lot of it was team building activities, a lot of it were regular status updates, and a lot of it is really just communication.
Yeah,
I
listening.
think listening and how to get everybody to communicate.
Yeah, awesome. So you went on to Kellogg School at Northwestern University. Great MBA school. What kind of triggered that decision? You said you kind of knew you were going to get your MBA. Was that right? Did you kind of have it in mind that you'd work for a few years and then go on, or was there something that you decided in your career, maybe a pivot or what have you, that led you to go to MBA school?
Yeah, sure. So, as great as my father was in terms of being a mentor for math and data, he wasn't a big company guy. And the area that I grew up in, most people didn't aspire to go to work for large multinational companies. And Brandeis itself was a very, rigorous school, but it focused more on theory than it did on applied knowledge. That said, I took a economics course. And one of the subjects, I had to do a paper, and the paper was the anti-competitive nature of the ready-to-eat cereal business. They were focusing on how hard it was to get market share, get on a shelf if you weren't one of the big, multinationals.
Like Kellogg.
Yeah, like Kellogg or General Mills, and so what I started to do when I was putting the paper together is like learning about the folks that actually ran these brands. And, it was all about brand management. So I was intrigued by this role, and I said, that's what I want to do. And, then I set myself on, all right, well, if I want to be a brand manager, how do I get there? And upon a little bit of studying, found out that pretty much everybody needed an MBA. And so I went and got some MBA brochures when I was in Brandeis still. And then I got this brochure from Kellogg that really resonated to me because it was all about marketing, just the way the school marketed themselves. And it said, if you want to be a brand manager, here's a great place to go. So that was really what led me there. And 3 years later, I applied and got into Kellogg. And, as they say, the rest is history. But it really was a pivotal moment for me to just understand what brand management was, and that I could actually be good at it based on what I had been doing in my first role, and what it interested me about it, going forward in terms of being that conductor, that center of the wheel that you have to lead through influence, versus actually just doing.
You started your CPG career at Gillette, which became Procter later. We talked about that earlier, and not too many people stay on after a Procter acquisition. You did, but tell us a little bit about kind of the choice of Gillette. Was it kind of part to get back to the Boston area, or I guess you were living there already, right? I mean, you had moved there when you were working for when you were at Marcon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Boston born and raised, and Gillette was the big game in town. And at the time, they had just gone through this major transformation, and they were communicating their vision of the best a man can get. They had just started that advertising. And I loved Chicago. I think, Chicago is a great place to live and raise a family. So I looked at jobs in Chicago, New York, and Boston, and I got the Gillette job. And just because my family was still in Boston, and I just had this great admiration for what Gillette was doing, it just became a natural fit for me. And I loved the hiring team that recruited me. And, I really enjoyed my early stages of my career. And then, even the later stages after Jim Kiltz came in, who turbocharged my career. I had almost 3 different, career paths at Gillette towards the end, but each phase was better than the rest.
Now, Gillette, traditional brand management at the time, is that kind of how they were organized? And
yeah, I mean, we definitely were organized by categories, and I had some great experiences working on razors and blades, and then feminine razors and blades, and then also transitioning that to Oral-B. So the end of my career, I was the head of innovation and new products at Oral-B, and we doubled the size of that business while I was there, and that was a crown jewel in the portfolio when P&G bought Gillette.
Sure. One of the key reasons why they did. Yeah. Complement the crust business. Terrific. Well, when we spoke a month or two ago, both you and I are in total alignment with this, building your career on a strong foundation of a big company. And as you know, I started mine at Procter and brand management, not too unlike your path. And looking back at those formative years, and you were there almost 18 plus years, if you had to take away, two or three of the key things that you felt that you really benefited from kind of being inside those Gillette walls, what would those have been, Gary?
Well, definitely the talent at every level. And,
Mm,
everybody talks about, the talent at these companies, especially when they're marketing driven.
yeah.
Everybody looks at the marketing teams. And as you know,
Would it
whether
kind
it's
of promote from within as well? Was Gillette the kind of up or out type of
well,
thing?
it
Or
wasn't quite, it was an interesting, mix when P&G bought Gillette
yeah,
because they said they were going to take the best of both companies. Gillette was a little different. We were a little bit more entrepreneurial. We were willing to hire people that came in
yeah,
from
that's right.
outside the company.
Mhm.
But by and large, everybody in the marketing career path came out of, MBA programs and was
Right.
groomed by the culture there. I think when Jim Kiltz came in and really did a transformation of the company, he was willing to hire strong talent, many who actually were groomed at P&G, to
Right.
come back in and take leadership roles. And I think that mix of both homegrown talent and bringing in talent from the outside was a key, reason why Gillette really took off
Yeah.
when he was there.
Yeah.
But I think the hidden secret that is known within the walls of Gillette and in Procter, it's just not the marketing talent that makes these companies great. It's they've got the best supply chain people in the world. They've
Yeah.
got the
Yeah.
best HR people in the world. They have the
Product
best
development.
finance people in the world. And
Yeah.
and a lot of
Yeah.
it is that, that broad development and training that you get
Right.
in all the
Right.
functional areas.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember someone telling me about halfway through my Procter career that, because everyone says, it's such a great marketing company. I said, yeah, pretty good at marketing, but it's basically an excellent P&D company that's got a pretty good marketing arm. And,
Exactly.
being able to develop those innovative products. I mean, if you think about them, the Gillette razors, the Pampers diapers, the oral care products, Crest getting the ADA. John Smale, I think, was one of the former CEOs of Procter, but he was the brand manager at Crest that got that AD endorsement back in the 60s. I mean, just super innovative stuff. And that makes such a difference in that world. So anyway, but back to my question. So the people were key. What were two or three of the other things that you felt were really foundational for you during those first, 18, 20 years at Gillette?
Well, I learned a lot about just how to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And, people take it for granted that, that not every company knows how to do that. I mean, if I look back at my Gillette days and what influenced me going forward, it is like hiring top talent, making sure that there's strategy and vision that's aligned within the organization and a drive for results. And I think what I learned from Jim Kiltz also was don't be afraid to use outside help and advisors.
Right.
When
Right.
we were kind of going through our transformation, we had McKinsey and Bain in at the same time, kind of dueling it out on projects. But I think my early days at Gillette, we were kind of insular, and
Mm.
and everybody really wanted to kind of do things on their own, and they were almost afraid to ask for help. And I think
Wow.
that's something that I've taken with me to other jobs is it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask
Mm.
your boss for help. It's okay to use outside resources. A lot of companies, believe it or not, put walls up and say we can do it
Yeah.
ourselves. We don't need to either
Yeah.
spend the money or we don't need outside help. And that I think framework was flipped on its head when I was, in my later
Mm.
days at Gillette.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Anything else that you think were really foundational there that benefited you, years and years later as you moved into the corner office?
Well, if as you know, when you're in your first job at product management, brand management, your job is to, work with a lot of different functional areas, bring them
Yeah,
together and get them to work on your project.
yeah, yeah.
You are the center focus of your project, but they all have day jobs and they all have other things to do. And in
Right,
many
right.
cases, their senior management might help set priorities, but at the end of the day, you have to get them to work on your project.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
you can tell people what to do that are 20 years, older than you, but that only goes so far. So at the end of the day, it's all about persuasion, getting
You're
to know
fighting,
people,
fighting for
walking
mind
down,
there.
yeah,
Yeah,
walking
yeah.
down to their office and
Right,
sitting and,
right.
and getting to know them, and then asking them about who the kids are in their photos. It,
Yeah.
it really, I mean, it's the simple things that I learned, way
Mm,
back in high school is you have to kind of get to know people and get to know them on a personal level. And
yeah,
that,
yeah.
believe it or not, that goes a long way.
Great stuff, Gary. Yeah, so true. So on to Playtex and then eventually Timex, where you, I think, took your first corner office position. Was that transition tough? Did you find that those players were, as structured and as innovative as Gillette, or was there some changes there in terms of how you thought about that work, and how did you change? I guess particularly from a leadership standpoint, going into those other companies.
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the end of the day, every company has a culture, and every company, people come to work and they want to win. Obviously, the biggest change when you come from a Gillette or a P&G is that you just don't have the resources or always the talent in every functional area that you're used to.
Right.
And that's not a knock on any of these small companies. It's
Yeah.
just that, they don't have the resources, and they don't always have that process or train from within. And in many cases, they have to run a lot leaner. So that was the major, difference where I noticed, I call it the cold splash of water, where you go in and you realize, wait a second, I don't have.
This isn't Kansas anymore.
Yeah. And then so the question is, how do you then operate in that type of environment? And in many cases, it's a balance of, all right, well, you have to roll up your sleeves. You can't just be the conductor anymore. You have to then be part of the team, and you have to help. And the challenge is, how do you do that without either micromanaging or without doing all the stuff, doing it yourself? And in many cases, it's bringing in a couple of key new hires to maybe upgrade talent. And in many cases, it's just, setting that vision and strategy so that everybody realizes that, we're all in this together and we can co-create, and using a lot of the tools that I used back at Gillette and Procter, but you just have to do it in a smaller scale. So the bigger lesson there is, you have to set priorities. You have to get complexity out of the system, because in a much smaller organization that has less resources, you have to focus on those few core things that are going to make you successful.
Yeah. And Timex, that's a real interesting job. We have a couple of common folks that we've known there, and others that have also been on the show. Great organization, obviously one that's been around for a long time. What was the attraction in joining Timex at that point in your career?
Well, I had moved my family from Boston to Connecticut to work for Playtex, and we sold that to a large multinational. And after we sold that company, I started to look at CEO roles, and Timex was in Connecticut. Interestingly, it's owned by a family out of Norway. And
I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And half the businesses were licensed brands. So beyond brand Timex, we had license deals with Ferragamo, Versace, Nautica, and Guess. So a large part of my role there was to manage the licensed partners.
Yeah.
And then also, help set a strategy for how we were going to grow the business. And, and also, my commitment to the family was to reinvest in brand Timex. So we created a new ad campaign. We looked at a lot of cost savings initiatives to try to reinvest in the brand, and then also just build the partnerships with these large license partners. So in any given month, I was in Milan, Italy, working with Donatella Versace, and then had to fly to Bentonville Walmart to help sell in, the Timex Ironman set. So talk about a broad set of experiences.
Yeah, cool. And first time family business, right? Tell us a little bit about how, your leadership kind of style had to change given the ownership structure, or did it, as it related to your move to Timex?
Well, the constituent base, expands. So not only do I have to deal with then major customers and suppliers, we were a multinational company with a global footprint, and we were vertically integrated. So that was a new change for me, whereas Playtex was more domestic. And then having to manage a family with all their, ambitions in terms of a fiduciary responsibility, and making sure that there was a frequent dividend that was paid out to the family, and communicating to the family regularly for business updates. So I learned early on just about the importance of frequent communication, transparency, and that experience really set me up to work in a private equity environment where there is very much a focus on the numbers and no surprises. And regular frequent updates. So I had a Friday call with the chairman of Timex to always give an update on the business and results, and that has carried me over to my private equity career, where I always have a frequent meeting in terms of business updates. So that cadence and I guess the drive for details is just something that has been ingrained in me, and it's made me able to be much more successful in the environment that I'm in now.
Goes back to the Markham days, right? I mean, you learned to do that way back when with all those software engineers,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
it's all
Yeah,
about communicating and working
yeah.
with people that aren't necessarily, that don't always have the same background or experience that you do.
Tell us about Qualitor Automotive. Now, you've been there, I think, close to 8 years, right? And are coming up on it. And private equity owned. And for those in our audience that aren't familiar with the company, give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch.
Sure. Well, we are in the aftermarket auto space, and for
Mhm.
aftermarket auto, that means parts that after you buy your car and they've been on the road for several years, you would then go to either your local repair person, or in some cases
Right.
you might do it yourself, and you might go to AutoZone or O'Reilly and buy parts for your car. So we have two main business units as Qualitor. One is that we sell wiper blades. So wiper
Hmm.
blades aftermarket. So after you have a used car that's been on the road for a while, you might go to a Walmart or a Costco to buy wiper blades, and we have the license to sell Michelin wiper blades globally.
Ah,
And we have
did you sell into the O'Reillys as well and the other types of stores, or
most.
only the big
We're
box?
mostly, because of the brand and
Yeah,
the advertising that we do, we're mostly what we would call self-service. So
got it.
any
Got it.
any mass merchandiser or online retailer, we have predominant distribution. In fact, we have Costco. We have the global relationship. So we sell
Cool.
Costco US, Costco Canada, and all the
Right.
Costcos around the world.
Awesome. And global perspective, then, is it pretty much equally both inside and outside the U.S., or a predominantly U.S. business?
It's predominantly U.S., but our
Yeah.
entire supply chain is Asia focused, which
Yeah.
has given us some challenges in the last couple of years with the global supply chain crisis. But we are an asset light model, and so we bring all of our product lines in to North America and sell primarily to North America customers and
Yeah.
consumers. And half of the business is business to business. So separate from our wiper blades, we sell brake hardware components.
Hmm.
And for if you've not changed your brakes in a while, all the things that go around holding in, the friction pads are things that we sell.
Yeah.
So we've got brake hardware kits for just about every car on the road going back to the 60s. And if you were going to change your own brakes on a car, you'd have to get our kits to be able to
Hmm.
finish the brake job. And so we sell into AutoZone, O'Reilly, Napa, and pretty much any installer that is going to do a brake job for you.
Cool. Cool. How many employees worldwide?
We've got about 300, including our
Yeah.
warehouse and semi-automated manufacturing folks.
Did they start as a family-owned business and then move to private equity, or has it been kind of a private equity, investment from the beginning?
So each business is about 60 years old, and they were all
Hmm.
started by families and eventually
Right.
sold to some type of larger entity that then was spun off to private equity probably 20 years ago. So we're
Wow.
probably on our third private equity ownership now for
Yeah.
each of these businesses.
Big change between kind of family-owned business and private equity. Compare and contrast a little bit for us on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, the similarities are the focus on results and
Yeah.
making sure that the finances are adequate, and there's regular reporting, and people don't want surprises in these type of businesses. I
Right.
think
Right.
that for me, the benefit of private equity is it's a smaller, more focused board. I've got
Hmm.
amazing sponsors with my private equity firm, and we can make decisions a lot faster. Where
Quickly.
families
Yeah.
tend to I don't want to say be dysfunctional, but to get alignment from an entire family is a challenge. And so while
And
even
each
there,
generation it gets more and more difficult.
exactly, so even though I had a single point of contact, I mean, there were
Yeah.
definitely other members of the family that were influencing some of our business. I don't have
Yeah.
to deal with that at all in a private
Right.
equity environment,
Right.
and that's what I love about it. It's like I've got a direct line to the deal team and an operating partner, and we're all focused. And when I have opportunities, I bring it to them. When I have issues, I bring it to them, and we very much are a tight working team, and we can make decisions very quickly.
If you think of kind of the arc of your leadership style from the early days at Marcom and Gillette to today, what's changed and what's stayed the same?
Well, I think the things that have stayed the same have just been my calm, focused demeanor and the ability to just kind of be nice and authentic and to get things done. Whether it's, reporting to the bank that I have to deal with, or my private equity sponsors, or my constituents, whether it be, Costco and Walmart, or even the Michelin organization. It's just getting to know people and getting aligned on common objectives and common goals, and then having frequent communication. As much as the world has changed and is data focused, the world still runs on relationships. And I just pride myself on my ability to build relationships and nurture them and maintain them. I think, I've always, especially during the pandemic, probably the biggest leadership tool that I've had to rely on is just that calm demeanor. As much as we're in a drive for results organization and, a drive for results private equity backed situation, when things aren't going well, or you've got external challenges like a global supply chain issue, you've got to be able to just show calmness to the organization, because they want to know that somebody's in charge that is not panicking, that has their back, and that is showing them a vision and a future of how we're going to get out of the situation. And, in a lot of cases, I can't guarantee that back in the second quarter of 2020, I couldn't guarantee that the pandemic was going to be over. And I had no idea what the future was going to be like, but I had to at least put calm into the organization and let people know that things were okay. And that was probably I've always had that framework, but I had to really rely on it, much more than I ever had for the last couple of years.
What's different now? What kind of skills or leadership style is different now from perhaps something you did in earlier career?
Well, just from a functional standpoint, I've always been labeled as the marketing innovation guy, and probably the last 5 or 10 years, I am as much of a finance, supply chain operations person than I've ever been, and even for the last couple of years, much more focused on cash management. Like, are we going to be able to pay people, because our container costs are going up 10 times, and our labor costs in the United States are not only going up, twice what they were before the pandemic, but we can't get people to come into the office. So we actually had to do a pivot to move a lot of our labor down to Mexico, just because we couldn't get people into into our facility. So that pivot, that ability to kind of make quick decisions, is something that I've really embraced. Whereas maybe in the old days, at Gillette or P&G, was much more alignment and taking time to make the right decision. I think you want to make the right decisions, but in this fast-paced environment, you have to kind of pull the trigger pretty quickly, much faster than I ever had before in my early days. And I think, as I said, the other change is that, as much as in the big companies, you have to train and mentor and get total organizational alignment. In a smaller company, and particularly one where where you need to make quick decisions, you got to roll up your sleeves and be part of the team. And balancing doing that without doing people's jobs, I think is probably the biggest balancing act. And in many cases, I'll tell people that work for me, don't come back 3 months with a final decision that then we need to kind of reverse, or that we kind of need to fine tune. It's okay to come from me, to come to me for help, but it's okay to co-create too. So here's the assignment that we have. Go ahead and work on it, but come back to me when it's not fully baked, so we can discuss it, and then we can come back and then finalize it. And that's the same approach I have with managing my board. I call it the board two-step. You never want to go to your board and surprise them the first time. So you kind of want to pre-sell the board and then come back to them with your final recommendation. And that's what I tell people that work for me. It's like, go ahead and work on this, but come back, and don't come back when it's fully baked, because if we have to make changes, it's only going to take more time to make decisions.
Get some early involvement. Yeah. What do you look for when you're making bets on the people that you invest in and hire at Qualitor, Gary?
A couple of things. For me, my whole framework is about marketing innovation. I'm very good at finance and operations, but when I hire people, depending on the position, in a lot of cases, I'm looking for somebody that complements my skill sets. So some of my more senior leaders, I've I've sought out folks that have really good commercial skill sets. I love going to Walmart. I love going to customers, but at the end of the day, I need people that eat and breathe sales and understand how to nurture the customer. So in many cases, it's complementing my skill set, and diversifying the team. And in most cases, it's just hiring people that are nice and authentic, and that can get stuff done.
How do you get at that? Did you have some favorite interview questions you asked to uncover that?
Well, the hardest part is getting, it's the get stuff done, because everybody can say that they can get stuff done, but when your back's against the wall and how do people do it? So, in a lot of cases, you're asking for past behavior on, frameworks or program management tools that people have or that they've hired. So in a lot of cases, you kind of have to ask, like, how did you approach the project? How did you track it? What KPIs did you use? When things were going off the rails, how did you get them back on? And how did you communicate, the variances against your plan? And unfortunately, a lot of times you just have to get references too to see whether, people do what they say they're going to do.
Right. Well, Gary, we're just about out of time, and you've been super generous, but we always have one last question we always ask, and that's, what kind of career and life advice would you give to someone who maybe has their own eyes on a corner office someday?
Sure. I guess I'll talk about three quick areas. So one is, set some goals about what you want to get out of your career, but be willing to be flexible. And what I mean by that is, I couldn't have told you that I'd be working at Qualitor or Timex, but I had my eye set on the prize. So a lot of it is like, get experiences versus titles. Be willing to take some career pivots, and be flexible about the type of jobs that you take, as long as you're keeping your set goal and your eye on the prize. I think number two would be to mentor people and seek mentors, and build a network. I pride myself on the network and the relationships that I have. That like anything else, it has to be nurtured, and can just continue to build a network. And for me, probably the advice would be to do it early. Build that network early. And with LinkedIn, you and I didn't have that tool when we were starting out. So there's actually a tool that allows you to do that. Yeah. And I guess the third would be, just be nice and be authentic. And that goes a long way in business. And that benefited me in my early days, and it continues to benefit me now.
Goes a long way in life as well.
Yeah.
Well, Gary Cohen, Chief Executive Officer of Qualitor Automotive, thank you so very much for sharing your story into the corner office.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.